When we talk about focus, we're not just describing a mental preference or a motivational slogan. Focus is a biological event, a shift in how the brain allocates its limited cognitive energetic resources. At the center of this process is the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive functions like decision-making, impulse control, goal setting, and behavioral regulation. When you deliberately pay attention to something, you activate a network of neurons in this region, effectively lighting up the command center of your brain. This activation has a cascade of downstream effects. It boasts working memory, sharpens perception, and suppresses noise, both external distractions and internal chatter. Think of focus as a spotlight. It narrows your field of view so that the relevant information stands out from the background. The more intense the focus, the clearer the signal and the lower the noise. From a neural standpoint, this means fewer wasted computations. Your brain, which consumes about 20% of your body's energy, becomes more efficient, less scattered, and more capable of moving toward meaningful goals. But this process isn't automatic. It requires effort, and effort requires energy. The ability to focus is energetically expensive, which is why it can feel mentally tiring, especially if you're not used to maintaining it. This is where a lot of people falter. They assume that because something feels difficult or mentally demanding, they should stop. In reality, that strain is a sign that your prefrontal cortex is doing its job. It's filtering information, inhibiting irrelevant thoughts, and pushing your system toward goal-directed behavior. There's also a neurochemical basis to this. When you focus intensely, neurotransmitters like norepinephrine and acetylcholine are released. These chemicals heighten alertness and precision, respectively, the signals you give it. They create a kind of tunnel vision for the mind, allowing you to lock onto a task with greater clarity. Acetylcholine, in particular, enhances the brain's signal-to-noise ratio, essentially helping your neurons listen more closely to what's important and ignore what's not. However, this system is easily derailed. If you're constantly distracted, checking your phone every few minutes, jumping between tasks, or multitasking, you never give your brain the chance to enter a deep focus state. You're activating the prefrontal cortex just enough to wear it down, but not enough to actually make progress. Over time, this leads to mental fatigue, reduced willpower, and even structural changes in the brain. The neural pathways associated with distraction become stronger, while those associated with sustained attention weaken. The tragedy here is that most people don't even realize it's happening. They assume their inability to focus is a personality flaw, when in fact it's a neurological adaptation to a chaotic environment. You become what you practice. If you practice distraction, you get better at it. But the opposite is also true. The more you practice focus, the stronger those neural circuits become. The prefrontal cortex, like a muscle, grows with use. And the better it functions, the more control you have over your life. That's the real power of focus. It's not just about getting more done in less time. It's about building the cognitive machinery that allows you to live on your terms. When your executive function is strong, you can resist temptation, delay gratification, and pursue long-term goals with consistency. You can choose what matters rather than being pulled by what's urgent or shiny. In the end, focusing on yourself begins with learning to focus with yourself, on command with intention and despite distractions. This isn't a soft skill, it's a core capability for anyone who wants to live a meaningful, high-agency life. And it all starts in the brain. Distraction is not just a productivity killer. It is a neurological disruptor that erodes your cognitive capabilities over time. When you allow your attention to constantly shift, you dilute the very neural mechanisms that allow you to think clearly, plan effectively, and act with intention. The brain, while powerful, has limited resources. It was not designed for multitasking in the way modern environments demand. Each time your attention jumps from one task to another, from one app to another, from one thought to another, you are forcing your brain to reallocate attention, reset context, and recalibrate priorities. This is cognitively expensive, and more importantly, it weakens your focus circuitry. The prefrontal cortex, which governs concentration and self-control, is especially vulnerable to this kind of overload. When distractions are constant, be they external like notifications or internal like mind wandering, the prefrontal cortex never gets the sustained activation it needs to enter deep, goal-directed work. Instead, neural activity remains shallow and scattered. This results in poor decision-making, impulsive behavior, and a chronic sense of mental fog. You may feel like you're busy or active, but in reality, you're spinning your wheels without traction. Every distraction carries a cognitive cost known as attention residue. This means that even after you've switched to a new task, a part of your attention remains stuck on the previous one. It can take up to 20 minutes to fully reorient after a single interruption. If your day is filled with dozens of micro distractions, your brain never gets a chance to fully lock in. Over time, this leads to a fragmented style of thinking where deep insight, creativity, and sustained progress become nearly impossible. On a neurological level, repeated distraction strengthens neural pathways associated with impulsivity and novelty seeking. Your brain starts to expect interruption. It becomes uncomfortable with stillness and long periods of effort. The dopamine system, which is meant to reinforce meaningful progress, becomes hijacked by quick, low-effort rewards, like messages, clicks. This sets up a feedback loop where you crave more stimulation, but feel less satisfied, constantly searching for the next hit of novelty. What makes this especially insidious is that it feels normal. The modern world is structured to promote exactly this kind of fractured attention. We are surrounded by devices, alerts, and platforms all designed to compete for our cognitive real estate. The average person touches their phone over 2,000 times a day. These behaviors don't seem dangerous, but over time, they rewire the brain in ways that make deep work, focus, and emotional regulation more difficult. To truly reclaim your time and mental clarity, you need to understand that distraction is not neutral. It is a form of cognitive degradation. Every time you give in to an unnecessary interruption, you weaken your brain's ability to sustain attention in the future. This is why setting boundaries around your attention is not just a good habit, it's a neurological imperative. This isn't about eliminating all distractions, which is impossible. It's about managing them with intention. Create time blocks where your phone is in another room. Use tools like website blockers to eliminate easy temptations. Learn to recognize the internal cues that lead to distraction, boredom, fatigue, discomfort, and train yourself to sit with those feelings instead of escaping from them. Just as muscles atrophy from lack of use, the neural networks responsible for focus will wither if not trained. But the good news is that this process is reversible. Neuroplasticity works both ways. By deliberately engaging in focused work, minimizing distraction, and cultivating mental stillness, you can rewire your brain for clarity and discipline and depth. In a world that profits from your distraction, choosing to concentrate is a radical act. It's how you take back ownership of your mind and ultimately your life. Your future depends on your ability to focus. So protect it fiercely. Your brain is constantly adapting to whatever you do repeatedly. This is the principle of neuroplasticity. The brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. It doesn't care whether the habits you build are beneficial or destructive. It simply adapts to what is consistent. This means that every time you engage in a particular behavior, thought pattern, or emotional state, you're strengthening the neural pathways that support it. Over time, these patterns become the brain's default settings. When it comes to focus and attention, this principle has profound consequences. If you consistently spend your time on shallow, fragmented tasks like scrolling through social media, rapidly switching between apps, or consuming low-effort content, you are training your brain to prefer that mode of operation. The neural circuits associated with novelty seeking, passive consumption, and rapid reward become more active, more dominant, and more accessible. Your brain starts to crave short bursts of stimulation, even when those bursts are unproductive or meaningless. This is why it becomes so hard to concentrate on meaningful work after prolonged periods of distraction. It's not just a lack of willpower, it's a rewired brain. You've essentially optimized your nervous system for impulsivity, not discipline. And the more you engage in these behaviors, the harder it becomes to break free. It's not that your brain is broken, it's that it has adapted perfectly to the environment you've allowed it to operate in. On the other hand, if you build habits around focused attention, deep work, and intentional effort, your brain adapts in the opposite direction. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for planning, decision making, and self-regulation, becomes stronger. Neural pathways that support sustained concentration and delayed gratification are reinforced. Over time, what once felt difficult, sitting still, focusing on one task, resisting temptation, becomes more natural. This is not an overnight shift. It's the product of daily repetition and intentional practice, but it is absolutely achievable, and the change is measurable on a neurological level. Consider this: when you engage in a focused task for an extended period, you're not just doing work, you're sculpting your brain to get better at doing work. The neurons that fire together wire together. That means each time you resist a distraction, each time you redirect your attention, you're laying down stronger circuits for concentration. With enough repetition, focus becomes easier, more automatic, and even enjoyable. This is the power of deliberate repetition. And it doesn't only apply to mental habits. It shapes identity. If you consistently act in ways that align with discipline, clarity, and purpose, you start to see yourself as someone who embodies those traits. The brain doesn't separate behavior from identity. It builds identity based on behavior. So if you want to become a focused, high-performing individual, you need to practice those traits daily, even in small doses. What you do repeatedly becomes who you are. If you waste your time, feed your distractions, and chase instant gratification, your brain will support that way of living. If you protect your attention, choose your inputs wisely, and direct your energy toward growth, your brain will support that path instead. The choice is always yours, but the consequences are biological. It's important to remember that this is not about perfection. Everyone gets distracted. Everyone struggles with focus from time to time. The key is to become aware of your patterns and make intentional changes. Start small. 15 minutes of deep work, reducing screen time, journaling your progress. These actions might seem insignificant in the moment, but they compound over time. Your brain is listening. It's always adapting. Every choice you make is a vote for the kind of brain and the kind of life you want to build. What you feed it, it becomes. So the question is simply, are you training your brain for distraction or are you training it for focus? Dopamine is often misunderstood. Most people associate it solely with pleasure or reward. But in reality, dopamine is more fundamentally tied to motivation and the pursuit of goals. It is the chemical signal in the brain that says, this is worth doing again. And here's where it gets interesting. You can train your dopamine system to fire not just when you get a reward, but during the process of working toward it. This shift from outcome-based dopamine release to effort-based release is one of the most powerful ways to build lasting motivation and focus. When you attach dopamine to effort, the act of working itself becomes intrinsically rewarding. You begin to crave progress, not just completion. You start to find satisfaction in the challenge, not just in crossing the finish line. This is a huge mental and physiological advantage because it means you no longer need external rewards or validation to keep going. You've created an internal engine that drives itself. On a neurological level, this happens through a process of reinforcement. If every time you complete a difficult task, you take a moment to reflect on the effort it took, and you feel good about that effort, you begin to associate the strain, the push, the grind with positive neurochemical feedback. Over time, your brain starts releasing dopamine during the E process, not just the result. That's when effort becomes addictive, in the best way possible. This is the opposite of how most people operate. In modern culture, dopamine is often hijacked by passive, low-effort behaviors that deliver quick hits of satisfaction. Scrolling through your phone, binge-watching videos, chasing likes. These actions flood the brain with dopamine, but without any meaningful effort. They create a feedback loop where your brain starts to prefer the path of least resistance. The result, you lose motivation for anything that requires real work because it feels comparatively harder, slower, and less rewarding. What makes this dangerous is that the brain's reward system is trainable. If you consistently reinforce dopamine through easy, effortless activities, you become less tolerant of discomfort and less capable of sustained focus. Tasks that once felt achievable now feel overwhelming. You lose resilience, not because you lack discipline, but because your dopamine system has been trained to expect constant novelty and immediate payoff. Fortunately, the brain is plastic. You can rewire this system, and it starts by consciously shifting your dopamine response away from outcomes and toward effort. For example, after finishing a focused work session or completing a hard workout, instead of rewarding yourself with a dopamine spiking distraction, reflect on the work itself. Say to yourself, literally or mentally, that was difficult, but I did it. That was the win. By doing this repeatedly, you're building a deep association between challenge and satisfaction. Even your language matters. When you say, I have to do this, you frame the effort as a burden. But when you say, I get to do this and I'm stronger because of it, you're reinforcing the value of the process. This isn't empty self-talk. It's neurochemical conditioning. You are shaping how your brain perceives work, focus, and discomfort. The long-term benefit of this effort-based dopamine model is enormous. You become less dependent on external circumstances to feel motivated. You're no longer at the mercy of how you feel moment to moment. You develop grit. You build internal drive. And perhaps most importantly, you reclaim your ability to focus because your brain no longer needs novelty to stay engaged. The truth is, everything you want, every meaningful goal, every skill worth mastering requires effort. By definition, isn't always pleasant. But when you link effort to dopamine, you flip the script. You stop chasing ease and start chasing growth. And that's when real change begins. Your brain is a reflection of what you repeatedly expose it to. The information, media, environments, and people you surround yourself with are not just influencing you. They are programming you. Every input you allow into your life becomes a signal your brain uses to interpret reality, form beliefs, set expectations, and define your sense of self. This isn't metaphorical. It's biological. Neurons respond to patterns, and the more frequently they encounter a certain pattern, the stronger the wiring becomes. In simple terms, what you consume becomes what you think, and what you think becomes who you are. Most people underestimate the impact of their environment. They think they can scroll through hours of negative, shallow, or chaotic content and still maintain clarity, motivation, and peace of mind. But that's not how the nervous system works. Your brain is constantly scanning for cues. What's relevant? What's threatening? What's rewarding? And when it's flooded with overstimulation, conflicting signals, and emotionally charged information, it loses the ability to prioritize what actually matters. You become reactive, emotionally unstable, and easily distracted. This is not a moral weakness. It's a neurological overload. There's a concept in neuroscience called asaliency, which refers to how the brain determines what's important. Salience is influenced by repetition and intensity. The more often you're exposed to something and the more emotionally charged it is, the more your brain tags it as important, even if it's completely irrelevant to your goals. So if your daily inputs are dominated by sensational news, social comparison, or low-value entertainment, your brain starts wiring those as central to your worldview. You begin to care about things that have nothing to do with your growth. You react to things that have no bearing on your purpose, and you start to shape your behavior based on them. This is how identity gets hijacked. You begin to define yourself through the lens of what you consume, not what you create. If you constantly compare yourself to others online, your sense of self-worth becomes externally measured. If you're always absorbing conflict or negativity, you develop a worldview that expects conflict and breeds anxiety. Over time, you no longer see reality clearly. You see it through the filter of your inputs. But this, too, can be reversed. Just as negative inputs can condition distraction and anxiety, positive, intentional inputs can condition focus, clarity, and resilience. When you curate your environment, physically and digitally, you regain control of what your brain values. If you surround yourself with ideas that challenge you, people who inspire you, and content that aligns with your vision, you begin to think, feel, and act differently. You become more intentional, more grounded, and more resistant to distractions. Start with your digital environment. The average person is consuming the equivalent of hundreds of newspapers a day in digital input. That volume is unsustainable if you want to think clearly. Audit your information diet the same way you would your physical diet. Ask, is this content helping me grow? Is it making me stronger, clearer, more focused? Or is it making me anxious, scattered, and reactive? Then look at your physical space. Your environment should reflect your priorities. If you want to focus, create a space that minimizes visual clutter and digital noise. If you want to grow, keep books, tools, and reminders of your goals within arm's reach. Don't just rely on willpower. Build systems and surroundings that support the person you're becoming. Finally, be mindful of who you allow into your mental space. Conversations, relationships, and communities are powerful sources of input. Surround yourself with people who embody the values you aspire to. People who encourage your focus, not compete for your attention. Your brain, like a sponge, will absorb the energy and mindset of those closest to you. In the end, your mind is not an isolated system. It's porous. It's shaped by what you feed it, consciously or not. So if you want to become focused, resilient, and intentional, you must take radical responsibility for your inputs. Guard your attention, curate your environment, and remember that every signal you let in is a vote for the kind of mind and life you are building. Time is the most finite resource you have, yet it's often treated as if it were infinite. You can lose money and earn it back. You can lose energy and recover it with rest. But once time is gone, it's gone permanently. Every moment spent is a moment you never get back. This isn't just a philosophical idea. It has real-world consequences on your growth, your potential, and your future. The way you spend your time, minute by minute and hour by hour, is the clearest reflection of what you value, even more than what you say you value. And when you waste it, consciously or unconsciously, you're not just delaying your goals. You deciding against them. People often think of time wasting in obvious terms, see procrastination, excessive screen time, binge watching content. But the more subtle and dangerous form of time wasting is living without intention, going through your days reacting instead of directing, getting pulled into other people's agendas instead of setting your own. When you live like this, you fall into what's known as default mode. This is a state where your brain, instead of operating in a focused and goal-directed way, begins drifting. In default mode, your thoughts are repetitive, your actions are habitual, and your awareness is dulled. Time slips through your fingers, not because you were doing nothing, but because you weren't doing anything that mattered. There's a neurological cost to this kind of living. When you let your time be consumed by meaningless tasks or constant reactivity, you train your brain to operate without urgency. You normalize the feeling that there's always tomorrow. And as a result, you delay the decisions and actions that actually build your future. This repeated pattern reinforces procrastination circuits in the brain and weakens the neural networks responsible for long-term planning and sustained effort. Contrast that with intentional time use. When you decide how you spend your hours, when you create structure and boundaries, you activate the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive control and future-oriented thinking. You begin to develop a sense of internal authority. You start living on purpose rather than by accident. The power of this shift can't be overstated. It's the difference between watching your life unfold and designing it. Many people assume they need to make massive changes to regain control over their time. But the real transformation starts with small, consistent choices. Decide what the first hour of your day looks like. Decide what distractions you won't allow into your environment. Decide to protect blocks of time where your focus is non-negotiable. These aren't just productivity tips. They are neurological reconditioning practices. You are teaching your brain that your goals matter more than your impulses, that your time is worth protecting, that your future is worth building now. And it's not just about work. Wasted time also means missed connection, lost creativity, and delayed healing. Every hour you give to distraction is an hour you didn't spend becoming who you're capable of being. You didn't learn, you didn't train, you didn't move forward. The world moves fast, and the cost of standing still is that you get left behind. Not by others, but by the person you could have become. The truth is, no one is going to guard your time for you. The world will always offer you ways to waste it. There will always be another feed to scroll, another show to watch, another urgency that isn't yours. If you want to focus on yourself and stop wasting time, it has to be a conscious daily act. You have to declare your priorities, then align your actions to match, because every minute matters. Every hour is a brick in the foundation of your future. If you want clarity, discipline, and growth, you have to stop treating time like it's cheap. It's not. It's the most valuable currency you have. Spend it like it's sacred, because it is.